So now we get into the exciting part, and that is painting our rabbit. So we have got our rabbit, and he's nice and dry. Now what I've done is I have painted him with one single layer of gesso. So gesso is a primer, and it creates a really nice barrier between the air dry clay and the paint, because air dry clay is still porous even when it's dry. So it's really good to put something like just a layer of gesso. So it's spelled Gesso, and I've just used white gesso. You can get it in different colours, and it just creates a nice backdrop for our paint, a nice blank canvas. So I'm just going to put my rabbit out of the way, and I'm going to show you, this is an almost like an artistic impression of how I want my rabbit to look. So I want this one to look quite rabbity, you know, like the way that the fur would be, like a brown rabbit. So he's going to look a little bit more realistic. So I'm using different shades of browns and changing the colour of the brown so that we get more texture in the fur by adding white or a darker colour of brown. And then I've mixed a pink for his nose and the inside of his ears. So I've used 3 major colours in this rabbit, and it's really good to do this first of all, as I showed you previously, because you get this artistic impression of exactly what the rabbit's going to look like when it's finished, and you can decide whether you like it or not. So I really liked this one because I thought it looks quite natural. So we're going to leave that in the background just to refer to. And I'm just going to show you some of the paint. So I don't have a pink or a light pink for the nose and the inside of the ears, but what I have is magenta, and I can mix this with white. And then the texture of the fur, I thought I would use these 2 different brown colours. These are Daily Roni paints that I'm using. So this is brown and this is light brown. But of course, if you don't have Daily Roni, you can use any acrylic paints that you like. Honestly, I don't really, personally, I don't feel like it makes a difference, because you can get really high quality acrylic paints. You can buy less expensive ones, but it's, you know, you're going to be coating your rabbit anyway. You're going to be putting a layer of varnish over it, so it doesn't really matter. What matters is the colours that you can mix with these. So I've also got some black. I've got a big tube of white because we use a lot of white to lighten the colours. I'm using a little bit of rose gold as well. I might use that, and also I have got some, what's this one called, ochre. Okay. So I've started to mix these a little bit in the paint palette, because that's what I did when I created my picture, my artist's impression. And this gives you a really good idea of the kind of colours that you're going to need when you actually start transferring that onto the air dry clay rabbit itself. So it's a good idea to do the painting beforehand on a piece of paper, and then you've got your colours mixed, you know what you're doing. In terms of brushes, you'll want quite a fluffy brush for some of the larger parts of the rabbit, and then when you're getting into the finer parts, we have these brushes that are called detailer brushes. And for the features like the eyes and the nose and mouth, I'm going to use this very tiny detailer brush as well, or you can use a waterproof pen if that's what you prefer. So I'm going to get a base to put my rabbit on, so that I don't get my table dirty or, you know, stained with the paint. And then I'm going to use 2 different glasses of water containers, one to wet my brush, one to wash it out in. So that's what I'm going to use there. And then let's get going. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, I think I'll start with the pink of the nose and the ears. And I'm going to use a brush that's about a kind of medium-sized brush. So I'm just going to wet my brush, and then I'm going to mix the kind of colour pink that I want. So I've got a bit of white there, and I've got some magenta in that little palette indent there. do want it to be quite pink, so let's give that one a try and see what we think. And if you don't like it, you can always just add another layer of something a little bit darker or lighter if you wish. I actually do really like that colour. I think that's quite nice. So I'm just going to... And because the rabbit, the artist impression that I've done of this particular style of rabbit is, he's quite natural looking. So I'm not going to be too worried about it being really perfect. Now, as you can see, I've gone over the edge a little bit there. Just going to wash my brush out. And then what I can do is just lift some of that paint off because the gesso acts like a resist there. Now, if I've got too much water on there, I've got a paper towel here. I'm just going to mop that up and just wet my brush and just go onto the inside of the rabbit there. Just make sure I've got a good distribution of the pink inside the ears. I wanted it to look a little bit watery. I don't want a solid colour because remember, this is a natural looking rabbit. Okay, so I'm just washing my brush out and then I'm just diluting it with the other water cup. And around the edges of the ears, if I look back at my picture, it's quite a darker kind of outline. So I'm just going to take some white, mix it in with this darker brown. Now, when I opened the tube of this brown, it was quite dried up. But if you just mix it with a bit of water, eventually it will come back to life. So don't worry, acrylic paints are really good. You know, it's easy to revive them. And so I'm going to just do a little dry brushing. So my brush isn't loaded with too much water because if you saturate the gesso layer on the rabbit, what you'll find is it starts bubbling up a little bit. Now, if that happens to you, don't worry because the bubble will go down once the gesso dries. And this is all about learning how these different materials respond to any kind of things that we do to them. Now, as I'm going further into the ear, let's just do the outside of this ear as well. As I'm going further into the ear, I want it to start to graduate in colour. I want it to start to be a bit lighter. So we'll be adding a bit more white to this paintbrush. If your paint gets a bit dry, then just add a little bit of water. You may even see the gesso bubbling. It would be good if that happens, and then I can show you what I'm talking about. And with this, I would advise you to leave the paint to dry in between layers, because if you start painting over the wet paint, that's when you can start to see some bubbling happening on the air dry clay. But that's really happy with that first little painting of the ears. So I'm washing my brush out. There I'm going to go with a thinner brush that's got a little bit more ability to do the details. So I'm going to take a bit of that brown, take it into the next part of the palette and just add a bit of white into it, just dilute it so that we've still got brown, but we're just diluting it down a little bit. And then I'm going to go along the inside of the ear, just so it meets that pink inside. As you can see, we're starting to graduate the colour a little bit more. And it's just gives it a nice, I'm going to just go over the pink a tiny bit at the bottom, just doing these little sweeping strokes so that it connects with that pink. I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm just going onto the inside of the ear, connecting the two colours together. And the more that you can do it in a sort of dry brushing way, you know, the drier your brush gets as you're going along, it creates more of a natural looking connection between the two paints. And then just a couple of little sweeps along there, just to create that natural thing that you would have on your rabbit. They would have some little fur or hairs that would be going up along the inside of the ear. Let's do that a little bit more because it's not showing up as much there. There, that's better. Okay. Now if I find that I've got a little bit too much brown on there, I can go back over a little bit with the pink, which I will do. And there. And I'm happy with my ears. So because my brush is loaded up with the brown paint, I'm going to continue on to the top of the head. So he's got like a bit of a darker little patch at the top of his head there. I'm just going to come in and I'm using this more detailed pointy brush to create these fur-like strokes. As I said, the more that the water's dried on your brush, the more that you'll get this fur-like quality to the painting. There we go. And also, as we go further down, it's getting thinner. The colour's getting thinner, the paint's getting thinner. And it just creates this lovely textured look. He looks like he's got a little bit of a mop of hair on his head and a bit of a fringe there. Okay. So I'm going to continue going around the rabbit, just adding the fur. Now, as I come down, I'm just leaving this area of the face clear, because that's where we're going to be adding the eyes, and we don't want to have lots of paint on there because we're not going to see the eyes. So I'm just using this lovely detailer brush, using like a rounded sweeping kind of motion. I'm going to take this around the back so I can just show you the kind of things that I'm going to do on there. So here is where we can just add a little bit of the different colours. So let me bring my paint palette here and add a little bit darker brown here, and then just getting this kind of textured appearance. And then I can add a little bit of lighter strokes on there. And you just get the impression of fur. So you just keep on doing that. You can add a little bit of white to it as you go, and that creates that kind of blend of light and shade, which is what you'd get when the light's shining on the rabbit, and it just looks like the fur is more kind of three-dimensional. So I'm going to carry on painting and do the rest of him, and then we're going to come back and do his nose and his face.